More than 50 House Democrats have signed on to articles of impeachment for Secretary Kristi Noem. Other Democrats are calling to abolish ICE, and a caucus of nearly 100 are attempting to stop funding for the department entirely until badly needed reforms are enacted. There's so much chaos in Congress right now about what ICE is doing in Minneapolis and around the country. So let's break down what's possible for them and what's happening. So, Axios's Andrew Solinder reported today that more than 50 House Dems have signed on to co sponsor these articles of impeachment against DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. This is playing out a lot differently than previous calls to impeach Trump this time around or go against other members of his administration. There are some really key reasons outlined in these proposed articles of impeachment that provide more of a strong framework for actually getting Noem removed from office. Robin Kelly, who represents part of the Chicago district in Illinois, introduced these articles of impeachment, which I have here. Before we get into some of these reasons, I want to play a little clip from her speech about what happened in Chicago regarding ICE and why Kristi Noem needs to go.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to announce I will be impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Secretary Noem has violated the Constitution, and she needs to be held accountable for terrorizing our communities. Operation Midway Blitz has torn apart the Chicagoland area. President Trump declared war on Chicago, and then he brought violence and destruction to our city and our suburbs in the form of immigration enforcement. In my district, federal agents rappelled down from Black Hawk helicopters and burst into an apartment building in the South Shore area. They dragged U.S. citizens and non-citizens alike out of their beds in the middle of the night. They claimed the apartment was infiltrated by members of a Venezuelan gang. I don't understand this president's obsession with Venezuela, but they did not arrest a single member from that gang. I visited that apartment building and saw firsthand.
Representative Kelly's speech here gets into a few of the reasons why the situation on the ground with ICE is untenable, even before ICE invaded Minneapolis. She's talking about what happened in Chicago weeks and months prior. ICE has used white supremacist rhetoric to recruit random people to sign up. There's very little vetting process, as reporters have found, and even less training. Then they're handed these military grade weapons and instructed to descend upon American urban streets. Once they're there, they target people regardless of their immigration status, detaining them and unlawfully moving to deport them, whether or not they've committed a crime or are in the country legally to begin with. These actions in particular have targeted our neighbors and communities of color, but they also affect everyone in the area. So, at the heart of this issue, it ceases to become about immigration enforcement at all. It's a reign of terror, and Trump is directing ICE into cities that he feels didn't vote for him enough. They're going after urban areas in predominantly blue states. Right now, we're seeing that unfold in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. But despite the reality of what's happening on the ground, as well as the massive distrust and growing unpopularity of ICE itself, there's a classic Dems in disarray storyline playing out here. Axios just reported today that some Democrats are fuming as this Kristi Noem impeachment effort gains steam. You have quotes from Representative Sanford Bishop from Georgia saying it's quite possible that impeachment could be a distraction. You have Adam Gray from California saying people introduce bills that have no hope of any consequential change in people's lives. The reality is, this is not a distraction. ICE is currently terrorizing people around the country. And in addition to that, impeaching Noem is one of the few pathways to action that Democrats seem to have right now. These articles of impeachment outline really specific counts against Kristi Noem. According to Axios, these include the obstruction of Congress, for instances in which members of Congress were denied entry to DHS facilities and for withholding congressionally appropriated disaster relief funding. There's also violation of public trust for allegedly denying ICE detainees due process and violating the First and Fourth Amendments. And finally, there's self-dealing over reports that Noem awarded $220 million in contracts to a firm run by her top spokesperson's husband. We've seen a lot of this violence and corruption unfold in front of our very eyes in video footage captured by bystanders on the streets in places like Minneapolis and Chicago. Of course, there was the shooting and killing of Renee Good, an unarmed American citizen who was exercising her First Amendment rights. This ignited a firestorm around the country and the world, but that wasn't the first time an ICE agent killed someone, and it won't be the last. Last night, we saw another shooting in Minneapolis with an ICE agent shooting a man in the leg and claiming that he was trying to evade arrest. There are also reports like this one coming out of Minneapolis.
They are using chemical irritants. They are using flashbangs. We also talked to an individual who was not involved with the protest, and he was just trying to get his kids out of the neighborhood. He had 6 kids loaded into his car, including a 6-month-old, when law enforcement threw a flashbang at his car, and now he has told us all 6 of his kids were transported to the hospital. We saw EMS come in. We expect that they are going to be okay, but obviously that father tonight is very worried about his kids.
Here we have a local reporter on the scene relaying that a man who was not involved in any of the protests had his 6 kids in the car, including a 6-month-old, that they were driving away and an ICE agent threw a flashbang grenade into the car, injuring the children. What this reads as is that the federal government is at war with American citizens based on just where they live and whether that area predominantly voted for Trump or not. The pretense of immigration enforcement completely falls away here. It's just random, sporadic, extrajudicial violence aimed at anyone who crosses paths with ICE. When you look at the reality of the situation, impeaching Kristi Noem is just the tip of the iceberg. There are increasing calls from among Democrats to abolish ICE entirely. But with that, again, you have that Dems in disarray story. The political reality right now is a little more complicated. We have political reporting that many Democrats are ready to fund ICE with conditions. So Politico reports here, as they negotiate fiscal 2026 funding for the Department of Homeland Security with Republicans ahead of a January 30th shutdown deadline, Democrats are demanding new rules for DHS agents, such as forcing them to use body cameras, refrain from wearing masks, and go through more extensive training. We have a quote from Representative Pete Aguilar of California saying, House Democrats want accountability and oversight of ICE. They should have to continue to testify to Congress as to what they are doing. But more importantly, we need to look out for the American people right now. They are terrorizing people in the streets of this country. Essentially, you have some Democrats saying that the only way to rein in ICE is to set restrictions on new funding that could go to ICE, giving them money while trying to tell them how they can use it at the same time. But for other Democrats, that isn't enough. And the situation goes even more complicated when you consider the impacts of what's already passed through Congress under Trump, namely the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. The Brennan Center for Justice reported on this last August, calling it a deportation industrial complex. And what this says is that the One Big Beautiful Bill allocates more than $170 billion over 4 years for border and interior enforcement, with a stated goal of deporting 1 million immigrants each year, more than the entire yearly budget for all local and state law enforcement agencies combined. These efforts to find, arrest, detain, and deport immigrants already living in the country includes those who mainly have not even committed a crime, and many of whom have had lawful status in the past. It goes on to say the July 2025 funding package appropriates huge sums for deportations while neglecting processes that are needed for a fair and workable immigration system, such as immigration judges to ensure citizens or immigrants are not erroneously deported. As we've already seen in numerous cases that have played out over the past year, which was the deadliest year for ICE on record in the past 2 decades, so much of this extrajudicial violence against US citizens, people who haven't committed crimes, and people who have existed here lawfully, they've just been allowed to continue. In addition, the Brennan Center points out that most of these detention facilities will be operated by for-profit private prison corporations and other private contractors, creating strong economic and political interests that will make the new apparatus very difficult to dismantle. This system sounds all too familiar. You have the federal government demonizing an entire group of people and placing blame on them for all of the country's problems. You have the same federal government pouring billions upon billions of dollars into an agency designed to brutalize this population and lock them up in detainment and deportation centers. Finally, you have the for profit prison system looking to create a pipeline of cheap labor through this process. For anyone who's familiar with authoritarian regimes of the past, this is not just a warning sign. This is a five-alarm fire. And that's why the Progressive Caucus of Democrats is taking things a step further. Despite these limitations because of the supposed big, beautiful bill, the Progressive Caucus is demanding no new funding for DHS immigration enforcement until these needed reforms take place. The Congressional Progressive Caucus is made up of nearly 100 members, and it's led by Deputy Chair Ilhan Omar. They released this statement a couple days ago opposing new funding for DHS immediately until significant reforms are enacted. They said, the CPC opposes any appropriation bill that provides any funding to immigration enforcement agencies within the Department of Homeland Security unless there are meaningful and significant reforms to immigration enforcement practices. This idea would create a workaround. So instead of having to give ICE more funding to set restrictions on their conduct, these Democrats are basically saying to cut off funding at the source altogether until they see some significant reforms. And as chants to abolish ICE grow louder, both within the elected side of the party and the constituency side of the party, you can also argue that maybe no reform is possible with an organization like this. As compared to previous years, we are seeing broad and growing popular sentiment around the idea that ICE is unnecessary, that we're devoting far too much of our country's budget to these operations, and in fact, violence like this at the heart of an organization cannot be reformed. It just has to be destroyed. As this Blue Sky post points out, there's another option for what elected officials can do right now to signal solidarity with the people being terrorized by ICE on the streets. It says state and local political leadership at this time requires a willingness to be in the streets, facing agents of the federal government. Don't know what else to say but that. And on a positive note, even as the federal government is preparing to send thousands more ICE agents into both Minnesota and other blue states around the country, there has been an enormous and heartening response from locals neighbor to neighbor. We've seen people take to the streets to intimidate ICE officials, to help their neighbors get safely from one location to another, to provide essential resources if people don't feel safe enough to go outside, and much, much more. Let's look at just a couple of examples of this before we go. So this video was posted by Rectangle Pizza, a local business in Minneapolis. And the caption reads, "Our doors were locked today because we ran out of food last night. This is what's happening in Minneapolis. Please protect your spaces when you have time. Shout out to our Lynn Lake legend for defending our spot." One of the reasons why this pizza place might be getting targeted right now is because of their own community-led efforts to feed people during this crisis.
Minneapolis rules so hard. We started Thursday morning with $2,000 from donations from family and friends, and we thought by posting our Venmo with Smitten Kitten, we could try and double that. Since then, you guys have donated over $83,000. All of that money, we haven't transferred a cent. We're working with existing nonprofit organizations that can use it the best way possible. Most importantly, so it's not taxed and doesn't fund fucking ICE. As soon as we get those details worked out and we know where the money's going, we will update you here with full transparency so you know exactly where your kindness is going.
So despite a lot of the headlines reflecting this Dems in disarray sentiment, with some representatives going on broadcast news stations and saying one thing only for media to report another thing, one of the through lines of this story is how local communities and everyday people are standing up for one another. While Democrats are split between abolishing ICE, defunding ICE, or trying to place restrictions on ICE in exchange for a budget, local community members are putting each other's bodies on the line to protect their neighbors.